I'd like to welcome you to Kesed Online. My name is Danny Clinton, and I'm a pastor in Clark County at Kesed Church, and I'm excited to introduce Byron Kehler. Byron is a trauma therapist in Milwaukee, Oregon, and Byron has been doing this kind of work for over 40 years, and I know him personally, and he's ministered to our congregation a lot. And so, Byron, I'm so grateful that you were able to set aside some time to spend with us. I think everyone watching would agree that a lot of people's stories are being activated right now as they are watching the news, as they are trying to decide as a family how they should be walking through this, how they should be processing this internally. And so I emailed you a few days ago and asked if you'd be willing to just kind of answer some of my own questions, and maybe those watching this morning could also could engage with that part of their own stories. Yeah. And so let me just start, if you don't mind. How do we not let fear of the unknown derail us during this time? How do we not just get overcome with anxiety and a whole bunch of worry about all the stuff that could happen and really is happening, but especially might obviously be getting much worse? What are some steps we can take to
I think this probably feels for a lot of people like 9/11 all over again, where you're not quite sure what's out in front in the future, what it's going to look like. So I think that's probably for some folks being reactivated just in and of itself. The reality is it's a scary time. We're facing something that we really haven't faced in the same way before. And all of us have a natural tendency, I think, to, when you face the unknown, to be pretty nervous and scared about that. So I think the first thing is to understand that having those feelings is natural, it's normal, it's healthy, and for that to be owned and acknowledged for folks.
Yeah. So after owning that, what do I do with those emotions? I had someone ask, because we asked a few people, where am I supposed to put this emotion? And what would you say to folks that are just feeling rather filled up at the moment?
Yeah, it's interesting because when it comes to feelings, especially in Western culture here, we're doers. So even the form of your question, like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, well, should we start stockpiling, and should we, do this or do that or what? And with feelings, you don't really do something necessarily with them, you feel them. And so that can be really uncomfortable for us, where it's like, okay, I feel afraid, now what should I do? Rather than, I feel afraid, that's what I'm feeling right now, and I don't necessarily have to do anything about that as much as acknowledge that that's what's being felt, and then we care for ourselves, we care for the people around us. But maybe the issue for most of us isn't so much doing, but are we willing to feel the feelings that we're having, and for those to be appropriate and acceptable.
I see. So would you say, obviously stockpiling is a large conversation that's happening right now?
You can sell toilet paper for a big price right now.
So why do you think people are doing that? Why is that happening?
Crisis reactivates our old stuff. It reactivates childhood hurts. Here's a story out of Katrina. I was a first responder after Hurricane Katrina, went down and sat with people. And we met with folks for a half hour. There was a line out the door of people waiting to spend time with the therapist. We worked from morning till late at night, and person after person after person would come in the room. They would sit down, and we would have a half hour with them. So we would immediately launch into, what did you lose? Okay, well, I lost my house, my community, my job isn't there anymore, that kind of stuff. And then Danny, almost without exception, 4 or 5 minutes into the conversation, this would happen. But that's not why I'm here. What I really need to talk about is, when I was a small child, my dad was an alcoholic and it was really violent in a scary home. Or I was sexually abused when I was 8. or I was raped when I was 15, or on and on the stories would go about things that happened before the storm that the storm had activated. And so I think one of the things that's happening now in our culture, and the same thing happened at 9/11, is that people's unresolved stories are being reactivated by the powerlessness that they feel now. So the link between their stories that are unresolved early on is the issue of powerlessness, okay, where it's like back to unknown. I don't know what to do in this circumstance, and that feels very much like being a child in a home with a raging alcoholic dad where I don't know what to do, how to take care of myself. So lots of those old feelings get reactivated.
So people go out and try to do something about the powerlessness, and so buying toilet paper or disinfectant, hoarding it, not just purchasing for a family's needs, but hoarding it makes them feel a bit more
in control
and powerful.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, Danny, I think that there are probably 3 or 4 things that I would want folks to know that are commonly reactivated in their stories right now. One is the issue of control, okay? Not feeling in control, and for them to understand that a childhood lesson around that is when I'm not in control, bad things happen, okay? Like I get hurt. So those fears are getting generated and activated. I think, and this hasn't happened quite so much yet, but another aspect of the crisis that we're facing is isolation. And so for lots of folks, that by itself will be activating. Like I'm not filling my life up with busyness, with people, all of that kind of thing. So for folks that have trouble sitting with themselves, sitting in their own skin, being quiet, slowing down, this is going to be an environment and a circumstance that's going to be really difficult and activating for them. And then I think even issues of responsibility is that I've already had people say, you know, oh my goodness, I visited a house or I went and saw somebody and I'm afraid now that I've maybe infected them and how terrible that would be. And so I think that control, isolation, responsibility, those things are really reactivated easily in an environment like this.
Yeah, yeah. So especially, I would think for our children. What do you say to the families out there? And maybe we'll start just with parents. I've had a few folks contact me and ask, what do we do as mom and dad when we're approaching this crises differently? One woman shared with me that she feels it's a much bigger deal than her husband feels it is. And she feels it's not quite as blown up by the media as he feels it is. What do we do when we're approaching crises from such different positions?
I don't think that that's just an issue of trying to co-parent. I think that's an issue right now in our culture, is that we've had examples already of, yep, this is not a big deal, to this really is a huge deal. And there are 2 camps that are starting to form around that. And that doesn't serve us well. I think the reality is we don't know exactly what this is going to look like. And so could we be sensitive to the fears of the other? And so us deferring to people who have greater fear and anxiety around this, either because of what's getting activated in their stories or just how they view the world, optimist versus pessimist. And so deferring to those who don't eat meat. Okay, Romans again, where it's like, oh, okay, so now we're at the table together and you're afraid, so I'm going to defer to your fear and be respectful of that, sensitive to that, caring about that. And I think especially with the co-parenting is not sending the kids confusing messages where they again feel like they have to choose who's being honest, who's telling me the truth, whose side am I on, but for parents to recognize, nope, this is a time when, for children's sake, they need to hear a common message, and that is, we need to be careful, we need to, wash our hands, we need to do those kinds of things, and we're going to weather this together.
So as someone who specializes in childhood trauma specifically, and you had said earlier, this is like another this is similar to
9/11.
almost to 9/11. What should we be telling our children? What's going on inside them? What should we be aware of? How can we best care for them? What are some things maybe we do as parents naturally that aren't very helpful? What would you recommend that we're doing with our kids as they come home from school now and
Yeah, that's a little challenging because when we say kids, that could be everything from a 5-year-old to a 15-year-old. And developmentally, we're able to hold different things depending on our development and our age. Certainly with younger kids, watching television, we saw this with 9/11, seeing the pictures of the airplanes hitting the towers, or listening now to the news of everybody's got it and people are going to be dying. That overexposure is really troubling for kids. And so I would say, first and foremost, limit exposure, especially with younger children. Even the tone of voice with commentators can send this urgent message, this dangerous message. And so not only what they're saying, but just having that running in the background, which is common because we're all concerned about what the latest piece of information is. I think that's difficult for kids. And so your 15-year-olds, I think, can have a little more exposure, but younger children, probably not watching TV much and just keeping some of that off until you watch specifically the news. And then the other thing around children is what creates the greatest amount of calm for kids is routine, structure, and stability. And so when that changes, like school, okay, so after Katrina, school got canceled for a while, and then people came back to the classrooms and that kind of thing. But they had difficulty concentrating because the structure had been disrupted. And so whatever we can do in our homes to continue to create predictable routine will be helpful for kids. Okay, eat your meals at the same time. Don't graze throughout the day. Have them doing school work and stuff during the school day. So having same kind of routines and structures is going to be helpful.
Okay.
And then if you can build, one of the other things that we learned from past crises and traumas is whatever you can do around bedtime to create or maintain structures would be helpful for kids. Is that we know that they nightmare less when there is a bedtime routine and structure. So if you're praying with them, pray with them for the people who may get sick, for hurting folks, but read the stories, do the things, brushing the teeth, do the things that you do at night as a routine so that gives them a sense of the world is as I know it, other than the things that have changed.
Okay, excellent. Okay, shifting to more kind of faith-based questions for those in the faith community. I think a lot of people are trying to figure out right now how to be good neighbors, how to instill faith and resilience while also being reasonable and aware and responsible. What do you want to say to those of us who believe in a big God, but also see a lot happening in this world that makes us kind of question where He is in all this?
Crisis helps us or invites us at least to reevaluate our faith, or maybe more accurately, our theology of our faith. Okay, in that. I think for many folks, especially in America and Western Civ here, there's kind of a transactional relationship with God where I do these things. This might be a dangerous conversation, but I do these certain things. Like I go to church, I put money in the offering, I don't do these wrong things. And so because I do those things for God, God is going to do specific things for me. He's going to bless me. He's going to keep me healthy. He's going to protect me from harm. And I would describe that as a more primitive kind of transactional faith. It's the very thing that Job wrestled with, and more his neighbors actually wrestled with, like why this is happening to you. And Job's answer, and seems like God's endorsement of that was, I'm living this way and bad things happen in our world. And so this may not be God's fault. I remember again down Hurricane Katrina, talking with folks there in the faith community right after the hurricane, and them hearing news reports from sometimes evangelicals about, well, this was God's punishment on New Orleans for, kind of their sinfulness and all that, which the faith community down there kind of found offensive, understandably so. And so that's where our theology leaks out, where we try to make sense. I would say that this invites us, all of us in the faith community, to reevaluate our theology. What does God actually say he does protect us from? Are we protected from getting sick or from losing our jobs or the restaurant closing? I don't believe that's part of the protection that he offers. I think that what he protects us from, he makes really clear. In Romans 8:38, he talks about, nothing can separate us from the love of God. Okay, that's what's protected. Our relationship with him is protected. I don't think he promises us that we're all going to stay healthy and safe in every circumstance or environment.
Yeah. That is a really difficult spiritual posture for a lot of people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Facebook posts right now that I would say are really unbiblical in their in the way they're approaching this and sort of how they are processing that. But that's sort of how trauma works, right? It kind of just spills out. You mentioned to me that nationally, this is going to be nationally an earmarking trauma for everybody. How do you think that will change us, or how do you think that we will come out of that?
Oh, I think that there are a couple groups that are going to evolve out of that, which typically happen for any crisis. One is, how am I going to take care of me? How am I going to serve me? How am I going to protect me? And then I think there's going to be another group, which is, how do I serve us? How do I protect us? How do I care well for us? I would argue that that's the faith posture. So when you ask about the neighbor, what's the neighborly thing to do? Jesus seems pretty clear about that in the Good Samaritan, about who was the neighbor there. And it wasn't the religious people, unfortunately, of the day. That what he's pointing out is, it was the marginalized that stepped across the line and said, we're going to take care of you because we know what that feels like, to not have enough, to not be able to provide for ourselves. So I would argue that this is an opportunity for the church in a powerful way to act out what we say we believe, which is, we are our brother's keeper. We are the neighbor that risks ourselves to care for you. That's how we're the hands and feet of Jesus.
That's great.
That's what I think.
Yeah. So there's just so much emotion. There's so much happening. Even in me, as I try to understand how best comfort my family, how best to lead the little church that I'm a part of, how best to be a good neighbor. Sometimes it feels like I don't really know what to do when I don't know what to do. It just feels very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Again, we look for things to do so that we can feel like we have control. And the type of crisis this is even different than hurricanes or earthquakes, because those are time limited. Like we know, okay, the ground has quit shaking, and so now I've got to put stuff back on the shelves. Okay? This, we don't know how long the ground is going to shake. And so I think that that's particularly unsettling for people, because, is it going to be a week? Is it going to be 2 weeks? Are we going to get quarantined? Is it going to be 2 months? And so the unknowns are more. than typically we would experience in a natural disaster, for instance, that kind of thing. And so that just reminds us that this is a marathon, not a sprint, and that we're going to have to do a good job of caring for each other, and being sensitive to the fears that people bring. Financial concerns are going to be huge right now for folks who are having their businesses closed down and can't function. And so what has the church done when the church has been at its best? When people were hurting financially, Acts 2 talks about we had all things in common. We shared. We met in small groups, in households. We took care of each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell us specifically, personally, relationship with God. How can we strengthen that? What's our proper posture as we come before Him as a man of faith, as an elder in your own church? What do you think is appropriate right now?
Hopefully, we're going to be reminded of how important community is, that we're not in this thing alone, and just the role that community plays in our life of faith, that we find encouragement there and support. And so when we're able to gather again, being able to regather again with a renewed commitment to the importance of what community means as we walk with Jesus. I think for now we look for ways of doing that, whether that's online connections, looking out for each other, making calls. We talk about spirituality also being a personal thing. This gives an opportunity for us to do that with meaning, where it's like, okay, so if I believe these things, how are they going to shape what I am going to do next? I'm going to make this phone call. I'm going to reach out to this person. I'm going to check on this group to make sure that they have what they need, both physically as well as emotionally. They're afraid, and I might be a word of encouragement that we're all in this together. We need to sing from our balconies, like in Italy. We need to encourage one another in the face of the fears that people have.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for your insights. Yeah, any closing remarks?
100 or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you can see this as really threatening to the church, or you can see it as a unique opportunity for us to be the people in the world that bring Jesus in real time, in real ways, to a world that is hurting. And I think you can also see it as an invitation for people to work on things that are unresolved in them, that this activates and triggers. And I would argue that that's an invitation put in our mailbox. God saying, yep, there might be time for you to work on some things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you all for being here. We're in this together, and we're going to continue to see, I think, God be glorified. I'm hopeful in that, and I'm grateful that we can still gather like this online and talk about Him, talk about what we're feeling, talk with each other, be good neighbors, and love one another. So I hope you guys have a great week. Talk to you soon.